Welcome everyone back to another episode of the Parkinson's Policy Podcast, where we advocate together to raise awareness and advance meaningful policy for the Parkinson's community. From Washington, D.C., straight from the U.S. Capitol and beyond, we bring together senators, representatives, researchers, and advocates to amplify the voices of people living with Parkinson's disease and their caregivers. My name is Dr. George Ackerman, Sharon's son and founder of TogetherForSharon.com, joined by my co-host, Margaret Preston, the president of Power Over Parkinson's, and we want to welcome our beautiful and inspiring audience with us today. Welcome back.
Thank you, George. I have the distinct honor to be able to introduce our next guest. Representative Brian Chena represents Chittenden County and is a progressive Democrat in Vermont. He attended Dartmouth College, where he was a senior fellow and graduated with an AB in music. In '98, he moved to Burlington, Vermont, and served as an Americorps member at Spectrum Youth and Family Services. From '99 to 2003, Chena continued working in human services, providing restorative justice and outreach to youth and families. From 2003 to 2005, he attended the University of Vermont, earning a Master of Social Work degree. Since 2010, he has operated private practice in clinical social works, psychotherapy located in downtown Burlington. Chena is a community organizer and activist. He co-founded ISGOOD, a neighborhood organization that has reduced crime through gardening and other community service activities since 2005. From 2018 to 2019, Chena served on the Vermont Artificial Intelligence Task Force as the member with social work expertise in human rights and ethics. Chena served as a school board member from 2014 to 2017. He led the search for a new superintendent in 2015 and was the chair of the Finance Committee. Representative Chena, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we're really honored to have you here and excited for this discussion on advocacy. Was there something that drove you into, going into the field of politics, but also possibly in the area of also raising awareness for Parkinson's disease?
Well, I'm a social worker, as you just heard in my bio. And as a social worker, I work with individuals and mostly with individuals and families and groups of people. And I work within organizations. And I also have worked with communities in terms of community organizing. But I could do all of that work my whole career, and it would help people and make a difference. But if I can engage with my clients and colleagues in creating social change and changing the structures of government and changing our social systems, then we can amplify our efforts and amplify the change. And I always said that it would be great if by the end of my life, my profession was obsolete because we had solved all the social problems of humanity. That's unlikely because suffering is a fundamental part of the human condition, but we could certainly do a lot more to reduce suffering and to promote recovery. And that's really what motivated me to run for a political office, was to be able to organize and create social change and change policies so that we could prevent a lot of the problems that I'm helping people to manage, as well as provide more access to the best interventions available for people to promote recovery and healing and well-being.
Thank you. And again, we're grateful for the work you're doing and continue to. I'm honored, and I know Margaret is, just because we love this show, but really because we get to hear voices throughout the country, not just where we're located, and that means a lot. So to be able to have a representative or someone like yourself from Vermont really is just, to me, in a way, mind-blowing, because it's just incredible to see how different states are advocating. But in Vermont, it's often seen as a leader in healthcare innovation. How can the state lead in Parkinson's research, prevention, or environmental health initiatives, as you're also trying your best to accommodate?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying that I am a healthcare provider as a social worker, and I have worked with with people coping with neurodegenerative issues, but I'm not an expert. So in terms of the science, and so I couldn't tell you exactly how the chemicals are causing the harm, but I do know, I am familiar with some of the environmental factors that have been found to contribute to Parkinson's and other neurodegenerative conditions. And pesticides, herbicides, chemical contaminants that are in our environment are one of those factors. So as a legislator, I have co-sponsored and sponsored a lot of legislation in the last 10 years to restrict and regulate chemicals. For example, glyphosate, like Roundup, I think it's called, and there's the latest one is Paraquat. I might say it wrong.
Yeah.
And then there was atrazine. I don't know if you're familiar with atrazine. So there's these chemicals that humans have used to try to manage environmental factors like pests and weeds and things like that have caused harm to humans. And the first thing we need to do is reduce or eliminate the use of these products. And then the next thing would be looking at mitigation, because that can be done when bodies of water are contaminated. Sometimes there are things that can be done. Like I learned, for an example would be in Burlington, there's a Superfund site. Burlington is the city that I'm a representative from. It's the biggest city in Vermont, and there's a park that used to be industrial, but that's now abandoned and contaminated. And I learned from some scientists that you can ameliorate contaminants using fungi, sometimes using bacteria, like using life that can actually process those chemicals. But there hasn't been a lot of political will to do some of that stuff. So we see this Superfund site in Burlington just sitting there, not like letting time do that work, because over 20,000 years, chemicals break down too. But there's things we might be able to do to restore the environment. There's certainly things we can do to stop the harm. And so I think the first policy decision would be to restrict the use of chemicals, and as well as medical monitoring and tracking when there is contamination, tracking how it's affecting the people. The next thing, the next sort of policy lever I would identify would be interventions. That science is progressing, medical science is progressing so fast right now, and with artificial intelligence allowing us to crunch the genetic data and information from medical tests quicker, and to analyze patterns. We can use the cutting edge technology like AI to improve testing and to improve our understanding of genetics, et cetera. And so that as we do that and we learn more about how to turn genes on and off, we may come up with, there are treatments that could be given to folks who have neurodegenerative diseases that are laser focused on turning genes on and off, which can reset our nervous system. However, I really would like to take a moment to highlight a plant medicine that already does this. So even without any additional research, the earth has given us a gift in a plant called iboga. And iboga is a shrub from Africa, and it's a shrub that has been used in the Bwiti religion for millennia, since time immemorial. And the Bwiti religion, which is practiced by a few tribes in Central and West Africa, have been the stewards of this jungle plant, and they use it in rituals and ceremonies for its healing powers. And it is a psychedelic plant medicine. The way you harvest it is you uncover the roots and scrape some of the bark off the root and then drink it in a tea or in a pill. But what this medicine does is actually revolutionary. What we have found that it does, it can cure so many neurological issues. and scientists are still trying to figure out exactly how it works, but it essentially resets genes, and it resets the biochemistry of multiple neurotransmitters across the entire body. So it's not only resetting them in the brain, it's resetting them in the gut, which is the second greatest concentration, and in your fingers and in your toes and in your spine. And it's resetting dopamine, it's resetting serotonin, it's resetting a variety of neurotransmitters that are associated with Parkinson's. And so just to tie it specifically into the condition that we're here to talk about today, Parkinson's disease, there are clinics currently in Mexico, in Canada, I believe, where it's Canada, it's not allowed, so they're underground there. But in Mexico, there are legal ibogaine clinics providing treatments for people with multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, to help with regeneration of the nervous system. And this plant medicine holds great promise for reversing some of the symptoms. It may not completely cure it for folks, but it certainly can restore functioning for people. One story I would share about this is there's a man in Vermont I met who had brain tumors, and they had to remove parts of his brain, and he had lost the ability to walk and talk and work in a normal way, and it led to suicidality and to great mental suffering, and there was just nothing the doctors could do for him. And he learned from some veterans who had gone to Mexico to get ibogaine treatment for PTSD that he could get it to help regenerate his brain after the injury from the surgery. And he went and did the initial treatment, and he has to take this medication, this herb. It's a medication, but it's an herb. It's derived from a plant. He has to take a micro dose regularly, but his brain is regrowing. He can talk, he can walk, his functioning is coming back, and the doctors, they understand what's doing it, but they can't explain it. They don't know why it makes the brain regrow. And so I share that because that's one detailed example of the kinds of treatments we should be looking at, exploring, and making available to folks with Parkinson's and other neurodegenerative disorders.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, George.
No, I appreciate you bringing that up, because even this show, again, after we end, we still have a conversation, obviously, that continues. And just being aware myself, I learned so much from this show, and we appreciate your bringing that up. And I hope it reaches the world, not just Vermont, because I think these new discussions really can make and bring positive change. So thank you again.
Absolutely.
Yeah. On that note, before we switch focus, President Trump just signed an executive order last week that would allow 3 vouchers to be granted by the FDA for clinical research and development of ibogaine treatment. So it's a big deal for this medicine in the country. It's interesting because it arose out of the Make America Healthy Again concept, this natural medicine, and Republicans nationally wanting to support natural cures to addiction and not having the pharmaceutical industry profiting off of the problems it has caused. And also because there's veterans who suffer immensely from brain injuries and the trauma of war, and then they develop addictions. And this medicine has been life-changing for so many, but they have to go to Mexico to get it. So when he signed this executive order, he had a bunch of veterans up there with him, and really the messaging was they're doing this for the veterans, but it's going to help everyone. It's going to help. If those 3 clinical trials succeed and we can establish safe medical use in various locations, then that's just the first step to this being a component of our healthcare system. So I thought I should share that because it's timely, because this executive order was just signed.
Absolutely. It's very timely, and I appreciate you bringing that up, not only in this conversation, as George said, to our audience as well, so they can do their homework.
Yeah.
Learn to support initiatives like this. I want to switch gears. You
Okay.
are one of the sponsors of H79 that would ban Paraquat, that toxic herbicide that's being used in farming in Vermont. What does this bill mean to you as it relates, of course, to neurodegenerative health in the state of Vermont? As well as what do you think it's going to take for it to cross the finish line? There's a legislation across the country in various states, about 12 or so. We had similar legislation here in Virginia. It did not cross the finish line this year. So what do you think it would take to get ultimately passed in Vermont?
Yeah. It's hard for me to answer that in a simple way because there's so many factors that play in to
Thanks, Chris.
and I am looking just to see, I'm checking as I say this to see where it's at right now. It was, we passed it out of the House and it looks like it's in the Senate Committee on Agriculture. And, if I could look to see if they've taken testimony on it. I know there was a press conference last week about it. So people are trying to keep the pressure up. In a very generic sense, if I had to pick an answer to what is it going to take to pass the bill, I would say sustained, organized pressure from constituents on legislators who may be wavering towards the side of the chemical manufacturers. Sometimes farmers will also advocate for the continued use of these chemicals because they do allow them to manage very challenging situations. But we have created exemptions in other bills because I've seen a study banning things, and then I've seen that turn into actual bans, but there's usually exceptions. There's usually the state Department of Agriculture or Agency of Agriculture, the state structure of agriculture, state government has the power to create waivers and emergency use. Like if there was an epidemic of some pest that was wiping out they can allow things. So I would expect that if there are concerns about eliminating an important intervention for catastrophic environmental issues, that we could build into the bill those exemptions. So I think just having sustained pressure from constituents on their legislators that they're demanding that we take action to reduce the harm of the use of these chemicals, and that we pass something, even if it's not a complete ban, that we pass some kind of legislation that reduces the harm of the use of these chemicals.
Thank you. And we've already kind of mentioned how important environment is playing a role, unfortunately, in a way, causing many. I feel my mother definitely, her causes, we don't have proof, but was environmental. Is back in 7, 8, 10 years ago, they would come in and literally call to bombing your house for bugs, and you would have to leave it, and you can't come back for a day or two. And they would put like those, almost like when you're building a house, like plastic everywhere. And I can't imagine that was very, helpful and healthy for my mother or for even our family. And I don't think it's happening as much today, but unfortunately, in Florida, at least, they waited till some lives were lost before they made these huge changes. Now they don't even go inside the house, actually, in South Florida when doing bug spray, which is fascinating. But how can we also get the community, Vermont, the state, and everybody on your side to help, bring awareness to these environmental factors and also help pass legislation to prevent these potential risks?
Yeah. I think an important component is public education, because the more people know, the more they care. And then we empower people to make different choices. Like if your mom had other options and if she was taught, if the government made sure that she knew that there was harm and there were alternatives offered, would she have chosen that? But like you said, back then, people didn't know how harmful it was to us. In fact, they market it as safe to us. You know, they will market things. They'll say you're fine, and then later say, oh, never mind, you aren't fine. And sometimes we find out that companies knew, like with with fossil fuels. You know, the oil companies knew what the harm was in the 70s, or tobacco companies is another big culprit. They knew full well what they were doing when they used marketing to increase people's addiction to tobacco, and then states sued and got settlement funds. So, I mean, one thing we may need to look at doing with some of these chemicals is class action suits, or the state suing to get money to invest in the treatments. But I think the first thing is public education, making sure more people know of the harm, and they know, and also offering alternatives. I don't think it's enough to say to people, you can't do this, you can't do that. The government does that too much, you know, and I feel like humans do that too much. We like to be, you know, maybe we don't like it, but we gravitate towards negativity and not being solution focused. So I think the government saying, like, here's alternatives, you know, educating people will make healthier choices, make the alternatives, incentivize them, give tax breaks for them, make them more affordable. So I think public education around how environmental factors drive illness. I think also increasing access to interventions and providing, and then I think in general, like in a very general sense, access to healthcare is such a big issue in the United States. We're like one of the only industrialized countries that has a commodified healthcare system that has been designed to promote illness, because illness makes people profits. And I think until we get to the heart of that, we're going to have, you know, Parkinson's and all these other conditions are only going to, you know, be harder for people to manage when they develop them, because they can't afford to go to the doctor. They can't afford the medications. They can't afford the interventions. But honestly, access to preventive care all along might help. We might catch something earlier. Like if someone's developing symptoms of Parkinson's and you see that early on, interventions like ibogaine work more, because it can reset the dopamine pathways way earlier in that illness before it progresses to a certain point. So like having earlier screening, having, you know, easier access to healthcare. And so, I mean, that's why I advocate for a universal publicly financed healthcare system. And I hope someday we have that, because I think that would also be something we could do to help people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think, you know, what you're saying seems, you know, you've simplified it and made it common sense in terms of being proactive, solution oriented, preventative. It's all the things that are more action oriented in the positive sense versus, of course, the reactivity to our health system, our way of legislating, et cetera. So thank you for sharing that in terms of simplifying it and shifting our minds to be a little bit more preventative and be a little bit more proactive. So with that being said, it kind of dovetails into my next question really nicely. For those constituents who do support H79 that would ban Paraquat in Vermont, what do you suggest they do who, you know, support it? What actions can they take? How do they make their voices, you know, heard with their own lawmakers within Vermont? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, first, I want to acknowledge all the people who already have, because we did get lots of emails when it was in the House. So there are people organizing and advocating, and for many years, there have been Vermonters speaking out against chemical contamination of the environment and fighting to slowly restrict, glyphosate and atrazine and now Paraquat, these harmful compounds. So first I want to acknowledge all the work people have done and thank them. And for those who are trying to get involved, I think you could research who are some of the advocacy organizations in Vermont doing this work, and see which organizations resonate with you and get involved and join in their campaigns, because they'll do, when you do coordinated action, it sometimes is more effective. However, any action is effective. Sometimes one person, emailing a legislator about something is what makes a difference because of the timing and because of just like I've seen that happen where one person speaks out about something and it doesn't, you don't need 100 emails. That one person's able to connect with the legislator and the legislator then becomes their ally and their advocate and is able to be a voice, and it turns the tide of a decision. So I would encourage people to reach out to your own legislator. It can be a simple email, just asking them to support it, or if you want to put a little more work in, you can look to see how we voted on some bills and then ask us about that. You could email members of the committees that it's in. So you could, or write letters, so you could, you can look on our web, on the Vermont legislature website, and for each committee, it says who's on the committees, and you can get our emails off of the website. So you can email the committees. You can submit written testimony on any bill. Anyone can do that. You may not be able to get time to come talk before a committee, but anyone can write a letter to a committee and say, I want this in the record, and then it actually gets added to our website. So a lot of people don't know that, but if there's people out there who have lived experience with Parkinson's disease, or lived experience as family or friends or neighbors or community members or providers for folks with Parkinson's disease, you could write a letter to the committee saying, here's what my loved one went through, and I don't want other people to have to go through this. We should ban these chemicals, and those letters would be added to the record. And, not everyone sees everything, but it adds to the body of evidence for why we made a decision. And a lot of us read everything. I may not remember every single person's name, but I see the emails. I've got hundreds of emails about this issue over the last, or, in general, the issue of banning herbicides and chemicals and stuff, not just Paraquat, over the years. So people, it does make a difference. And if you want to invest a little more time, you could plan a trip to the State House, and you could reach out to your representative and say, I come from your district. I'm coming to the State House. Can you make a few minutes to talk to me? Almost everyone would do that, even if it's a few minutes. Like, I'm pretty busy and I don't always have big chunks of time, like do an interview like this. But I can make 5 minutes. There's no excuse for me not to make 5 minutes. I shouldn't say that, because then something's going to happen today and I'm not going to be able to talk to someone. I'm going to be like, okay, there was an excuse. But in general, we can make time to say hello to someone. And one thing I would say is we are bombarded and overwhelmed at times. So short and sweet is more effective than long engagement with a legislator. So practicing like a 3 to 5 minute pitch, where and personal stories go a long way. What I think doesn't work well is when people take a hostile approach or shame legislators or make assumptions, like negative assumptions about us. I think that then people get defensive. But I think if you approach a legislator and you have a heartfelt story and ask for something, that touches people's hearts. And I can say that regardless of our parties here and our differences in Vermont, we get along pretty well. And I don't think any of my colleagues are here with bad intentions. We may have very different sometimes perspectives on what's going to help people, but I think we all generally want to do what's right and to help people. And I think the people who oppose like banning pesticides, they're often afraid of the pests, or they're afraid of the economic impact, or they, sometimes they or their friends are invested in that company. And, that's part of, like, some might say it's not just to profit off of that, but if they don't fully understand the harm yet, so like part of it is helping people see the impact. And so helping a person see the real impact on people of these chemicals might help someone change someone's perspective. And sometimes a 5-minute conversation in person is better than an email. So I guess those are some ideas for folks. You know, it's like writing or trying to meet with us. And also just organizing your neighbors. If you want to invest more time, you know, you could be the one who's bringing community members together to make plans for advocacy. So
Thank you.
But thank you for being a voice for the Parkinson's community, not just Vermont, but countrywide. As we wrap up today, we wanted to send a huge thank you again for your time. You brought some important topics and also another conversation that has to continue after these shows end, but how important it is to have the community involved. Is there, you already kind of said it already, but do you have any words of encouragement for the Parkinson's community as we wrap up this show today?
Yeah, what I would just say is, keep up the hope that we can improve quality of life for our loved ones and ourselves in so many ways. There's so many interventions and ways to manage symptoms. There's so many ways to improve functioning. There's breakthrough treatments coming out. So, you know, just keep up the hope. And also, we are making progress with prevention. We're making progress with correcting some of the harm that humans have done to the environment. And so, you know, I think we're going to see a lot of loss before things get better for humanity. Unfortunately, I think that's our destiny and our karma, that humans have made a big mess of the earth, and we now have to reckon with that. But I like to believe, and I stay focused on the belief that the fundamental goodness of humans will prevail. And so I just, I'll leave you with that.
Well, I want to thank you again. I want to send the show to any closing comments from Margaret.
Yeah, thank you, Representative China. I can't thank you enough for closing on such a positive note. George and I do believe the same thing. That's why we're here advocating and sharing the good work you're doing and others around the country. And I also want to thank you for breaking down what advocacy can look like at various levels and making it bite-sized and doable for constituents. I think, you know, it's certainly, hopefully, a great outcome of this episode, so people can better understand ways in which they can advocate at various levels and bite sizes as they're comfortable with. So thank you for making it tangible so everyone can do their part.
You're welcome.
After every show, I always feel like I need to get a megaphone and scream to everyone out there how important this is. But knowing that we have representatives like you out there, I know I don't have to, because we have a voice throughout this country and specifically today in Vermont. So thank you again. I also want to thank everyone at Power Over Parkinson behind the scenes. Also, of course, Margaret wouldn't be able to accomplish this. I do feel every show is almost really like history. You know, we have the first ever National Council coming in June, I think the 26th, but as we see just for 2 years now, it's really when policy has become a huge impact in society, whether environment, veterans, and our community. So just grateful again for everyone's time today. And of course, our listeners, please share the show. Please support the representative and also POP. They're doing some incredible things. I'm jealous as I want to be at the golf tournament coming. But this has been another episode of the Parkinson's Policy Podcast, where we advocate together to raise awareness and advance meaningful policy for the Parkinson's community countrywide. Thank you again, Representative. Thanks, Margaret. And we'll see everyone back very soon. I think even sooner than we know, because this is such an important topic. And you can be sure that Margaret, myself, and the representatives won't rest, and we'll always be advocating by your side. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon.